Part 2. Reunite the family. A 16-year-old Malaysian girl asked online, "Should I kill myself?" 2/3 of replies said yes, so she killed herself. Youth suicides have been increasing worldwide. It was once unthinkable that children aged 6 or 8 or 10 would commit suicide. Now it is increasing dramatically. It is an utter catastrophe and it is entirely preventable. The unreality and toxicity of the online world, plus helicopter parenting, plus deranged activist school teachers have created several generations of young people with severe social anxiety. This needs to be fixed with a dose of good old-fashioned reality. 20% of Australia's 8 million households have grandparents living in the homes. For thousands of years, many different civilizations have known that grandparents enormously improve children's mental health. Grandparents in the home can dramatically reduce teen suicide and depression. Whenever a teenager is bullied at school, or has had a bad day, or is simply feeling depressed, and they can talk openly to their grandparents, and if they then discover that their grandparents and their friends were once bullied, that their grandparents and their friends have had many bad days or have felt depressed, then the hundreds of years of real-life experience that grandparents and their friends can give will bring balance to the teenager's worldview, will get the teenager's mind out of the pain of the present moment, and will give the teenager a calmer, more long-term view and understanding of life. Grandparents dramatically help reduce depression, help teenagers have some perspective, and help teenagers think more long-term, so they are less caught up in the pain of the present moment and more able to understand that life will bring many hardships and many joys, and that many others before them have gotten through hardship, and they will as well. It is grandparents and grandparents' friends and elderly people who can bring so much joy, so much stability to teenagers' lives, and teenagers in turn can bring so much joy and happiness to older people's lives. Youth depression, youth anxiety, and youth suicide are at horrifying levels. Likewise, many elderly people have high levels of depression and anxiety. We need to bring elderly people into the schoolyard. We can begin very simply by bringing a few elderly people into schoolyards at lunchtime. I know what an extraordinary effect it would have had on my own life if I had had elderly people to speak to in the schoolyard. When I went through unimaginable violence, and I had mindless thugs for school teachers and mindless thugs for schoolmates, there was absolutely nobody to turn to. The joy and wonder and support that an elderly person could bring would have been utterly life-changing. If we bring elderly people into the schoolyard, we will dramatically lower teens' levels of anxiety, depression, and suicide. We will dramatically lower elderly people's levels of anxiety, depression, and suicide. In the short term, we can simply bring some elderly people to the schoolyard at lunchtime. Additionally, many students and many elderly people would welcome the chance to sit in the school classrooms. I know from my own life experience, I would have felt much happier, much more supported, and much more calm if there had been elderly people sitting in my school classes, and elderly people in their turn suffer extreme levels of loneliness and depression. Many, many, many elderly people would jump at the chance to sit in the school classroom and sit in the schoolyard. In the long term, we can arrange to build nursing homes and possibly retirement homes adjacent to schools. Thus, we can make arrangements for elderly people and teenagers to have a much more permanent relationship with each other. Almost every civilization in human history has understood the importance of the elderly and the young helping and supporting each other. The idea that we have young people and elderly people who rarely get to see one another is an absolute catastrophe. Let's fix this tragedy, bring grannies into the schools. Furthermore, let us look at how we manage family payments through Centrelink so that we can encourage more families to have grandparents in the house. The effects on grandparents, teenagers, and the teenagers' parents will be absolutely tremendous. This will be one of the greatest things to ever happen to this country. Putting grannies back into the homes and into the schools. These results will be life-changing. Our children have been so brainwashed by materialism and social media that in order to develop empathy, we must find a way for them to have as many interactions as possible with sick children. Many children have terminal illnesses, or at least severe illnesses, and may benefit greatly from visits from school children. The students will gain empathy, compassion, and a new sense of perspective. Their own struggles will seem that much less compared to what the sick children are facing. The sick children, in their turn, may benefit very greatly from having people visit them, from making friendships, from the human interactions, and it may dramatically reduce their levels of loneliness, depression, despair, and hopelessness. Arranging for school students to visit regularly with sick children and interact with them, whether it is over screens, whether it is visits in person, whether it is visits to the hospital, whether the sick children come to the school. We can make arrangements so that sick children and students can meet one another. This will help the mental health and the happiness of both. It can be done. We can make it happen. We must get our children away from the screens and back outdoors where they belong. Today's parents may be the first generation in history to outlive their children. We are now seeing children presenting with diseases previously only seen in the elderly. Rates of arthritis, colon cancer, diabetes, hypertension, and stroke are rising dramatically. Colon cancer and stroke has doubled in adults aged 20 to 50. Rates of obesity in adolescents are staggering due to the terrible diet and lifestyle of our children over the last few decades. It is imperative for our children's physical and mental health that we get them outdoors as much as humanly possible. But children usually imitate the exercise patterns of their parents. Parents have been brainwashed by decades of television to think that real life involves sitting on a lounge in front of a screen. In actual fact, healthy and happy children would spend Monday night riding BMX bikes, Tuesday night exploring the local creek, Wednesday paddling a canoe at the local lake, Thursday climbing trees or bushwalking, Friday playing some form of sport. There are thousands of activities that people in all civilizations have participated in for many thousands of years. Long before screens existed, people spent their leisure time outdoors living healthy, fulfilling, and happy lives. Screens have brainwashed people into thinking that when you finish work or school, you simply spend hour after hour after hour staring at a screen. The great author Charles Dickens was alleged to have walked down every single street in London. He used to go on tremendous walks, and I have lived with many people from Africa who thought it was perfectly normal to go for a 30-kilometer walk. With this in mind, I have made it a lifelong habit to go on very long daily walks as well as all of my other exercise, and every town and city I have ever lived in, I have made it my business to either walk, bicycle, motorbike, or drive a car down almost every single street and to visit almost every single suburb. Everywhere I have ever lived, I have made it my business to travel as far to the north, south, west, and east as humanly possible. I have visited every inch of shoreline, every mountain, every park, every interesting place. And I am constantly shocked when I visit people who have never walked around their own block, much less gone for a walk in their local area. This sedentary lifestyle is killing people. It is leading to extreme depression, early death, and it is leading even children to present with diseases previously only seen not in adults, but in the elderly. We must get our children outdoors, and there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of different activities they can do. We need only look to every civilization in human history, and we will learn all the manifold ways that children can enjoy the outdoors life and the happiness, joy, wonder, and all of the other benefits it brings. Family courts and absent fathers. Since the 1970s, the number of single-parent families has skyrocketed, along with the rates of depression, drug addiction, violence, and suicide. The lack of fathers in many homes has had a catastrophic effect on lifelong achievement. By every single measure, children who grow up without regularly seeing their father achieve much lower grades in school, go on to much lower paying jobs, have much less successful and much less happy relationships, have much less happy marriages, have much poorer relationships with their own children, are much more likely to suffer from depression, drug addiction, alcoholism, violence or suicide, are much more likely to be violent or suicidal, are much more likely to be both victims and perpetrators of violence, have much poorer ability to understand the long-term consequences of present actions and behaviors, have much poorer ability to plan long-term, to shape their own lives, and have much less control over their own lives, their own futures, their own families, and their own children. Furthermore, girls who grow up in single-parent households are much more likely to be raped, much more likely to be murdered, and the statistics show that mum's new boyfriend is the greatest danger to a child's life in New South Wales. Children in single-parent households are much more likely to be sexually assaulted, raped, physically assaulted, or murdered than children who grow up with the stability of both parents. And there are decades upon decades upon decades of data to prove this. Children who grow up in single-parent households have lower levels of self-esteem, higher levels of aggression or violence, or higher levels of depression and suicidal thoughts, much lower levels of achievement, much lower levels of life satisfaction, whereas children growing up in a two-parent household have a much better chance in life, and in almost every single case go into a much more rewarding and fulfilling life. Family courts have catastrophically discriminated against fathers, and there is vast amounts of evidence that a great many false accusations are made against a great many innocent men. Children are turned against their fathers and only learn when it is far too late that their fathers were innocent and not the monsters they were made out to be. By the time children learn the truth, it is too late for the father, and the children's lives have been ruined by this gross misjustice. It is time for family courts to take a more balanced and sensible approach. I say this as the son of an extremely violent male. So please don't get the idea I'm some kind of deranged men's rights activist. I grew up around extremely violent males. Despite that, many of us are not violent males. A great many of us are extremely positive influences. We can save the world. A great many of us can dramatically improve our civilization and improve the wider world. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Cheerio.